All right, show me that little thing. There we go. All right, hey everybody, Adam Oshensky here, and I'm about ready to give my ethnography presentation on minor league hockey, and more specifically, the East Coast Hockey League team that plays about 10 minutes away from my house, the Adirondack Thunder. And the reason I chose minor league hockey and was more or less because, like I said, there's always been a team that's been located my entire life just a 10-minute drive away at a small venue, and there's always seats available. And I've really only gone to a couple of games over my life, which is really unfortunate and surprising when I take a step back and look at it, because I've always enjoyed watching hockey. I don't get a chance to watch hockey very often. Every single time I've gone to games, I've really enjoyed it. I think the atmosphere is fantastic, both at high levels and the lower levels, of which I will be covering today at the AA level. But I think more or less due to the scheduling conflict with the sport I'm very passionate about and I coach myself, being basketball, it occurring during the same season makes it kind of difficult to watch the games. I've always enjoyed the passing and the individual creativity that hockey allows one to have. So I really took this ethnography as an opportunity to ingratiate myself in a culture that's been available to me that I haven't had the chance to really fully gain knowledge on. And I really enjoyed the process of doing so. Just for a little background history, the East Coast Hockey League, as well as I want to give some history on the Glens Falls hockey experience itself. The East Coast Hockey League, though, began in 1988, a 5-team league that was across 4 different states. Ohio, Tennessee, Virginia, and North Carolina all had teams. They played a 60-game schedule, and they competed against each other and against some other minor league affiliates. Different organizations, not the ECHL or the AHL. And from 1988 up until today has changed quite dramatically. And it's been expanded to a 6-division, 2-conference, 28-team league that goes as far south as Florida and has a team as far north and west as Alaska. And more or less the biggest expansion period was during the early 2000s, when both the CHL, the Central Hockey League, as well as the West Coast Hockey League ceased operations. So they were able to add additional teams through that process. The Adirondack Thunder is located in Glens Falls, New York. And they are the ECHL affiliate of the NHL organization of the Calgary Flames. They're in their first season of operation in Glens Falls. And they play in the East Division alongside Elmira, Manchester, Norfolk, and Reading. And Glens Falls, like I said previously, has been home to a minor league hockey team. It's always been the AHL, except for this. This is the first year of the ECHL. And the Glens Falls Civic Center, where they play their home games, was actually originally built for an AHL affiliate of the Detroit Red Wings, which were the Adirondack Red Wings, and they were here until the early 2000s. And since the Red Wings left and were relocated, they've had representation in the American Hockey League of the Phantoms, the Ice Hawks. What was the other team? 2 teams here. What do we got? Oh, and the Flames, who were briefly here last year before being relocated as well out to Stockton, California. Now, when it comes to the ECHL rules and regulations, some important information, I can link up the website where some of these facts are found. The weekly salary cap for 2015-16 per week is $12,830 for the first month, when they're trying to establish rosters and kind of understand how many players and who will be on what rosters and things of that nature. During the first 3 days, it's a little bit more in flux than it is as the season progresses. And afterwards, the salary bumps down to $12,400 per week as a cap, with the minimum salary throughout being $9,300. So they have to hit that. Otherwise, they're in a salary cap violation. If they go above the cap, they're also in a salary cap violation. Teams are required to pay rookie players a minimum of $430 per week, and returning players $480 per week. And a returning player is classified as a player who has appeared in the team's season-ending or playoff roster from the previous season, or who has played 25 games or more of professional hockey games. That does not include things such as overseas, collegiate affairs, or in other non-NHL cloud organizations, which are any leagues outside the ECHL, NHL, or AHL. The NHL organization or the AHL affiliate of the ECHL organization that is under operation receives a payment of $525 per week from the above affiliate, and that can be used on whatever the ECHL organization deems fit, whether it be things as upkeeping of the stadium, gear, or even player salaries, coaching salaries, things of that nature. Just to clarify what is deemed a rookie and what is deemed a veteran. A rookie is any player who has played less than 25 regular season games of professional hockey. A veteran, on the other hand, is any player assigned to an East Coast Hockey League member team on an NHL or AHL contract shall be deemed a veteran if that said player is 24 years or older and has participated in 260 regular season games of professional hockey. Now, the one circumstance where this does not fit is some of the contracts have an ECHL provision, which allows them to be subjugated to being demoted down to the ECHL for certain player development, and that will not count against either the ECHL roster or the player itself. So they just have a provision in their contract that allows them the flexibility to be in the ECHL as well. I'm not sure if if organizations are limited to a certain number of designations for that assignment in contracts or not, but I know there is a provision available, and sometimes they use that. ECHL teams, when it comes to roster size, can carry a maximum of 20 players. 21, like I said, it's a little bit different in the first 30 days. So they're allowed 21 in the first 30 days and 20 afterwards on their active roster, not counting players on injury reserve. And teams can dress a maximum of 18 players each regular season playoff games, 2 of which are required to be goaltenders. And the other cap that they have on their rosters is they're only allowed 4 active veteran players. The observational experience that I was able to gain was a few weeks ago. It was February 28th. I'll link up the YouTube video of the game summary and the recap. And that occurred on Sunday the 28th. It was a Thunder win that was 3-1. It was a decent crowd. Most of the time that I go to the Civic Center is they actually hold the state basketball tournament there, as well as sectional tournaments and other tournaments for basketball. Essentially, I've gone there, and there's usually a decent crowd. The stadium, the Gunsfall Civic Center actually seats 4,774, and obviously they have standing room only available as well for certain circumstances. And I would say, by my estimate, when I attended that game on a Sunday evening in late February, it was about half full, and the majority of the people were seated right by the main entrance, which is, I can't remember the exact sections, what they're called. I want to say A, B. Yeah, I think they're actually A, B, C, D, and they wrap around and subsequently change in alphabetical order afterwards. But they're mostly seated by the main entrance. You were given tickets with assigned seating, but more or less people generally just sat wherever they pleased, and if somebody wanted to sit down in their assigned seats, it was no big deal. The other person would just move a couple seats over or down a row wherever another seat was available. The people that were there were pretty engaged, I would say. I mean, during the action, there was boos, cheers, oohs and ahs for big plays and big hits. And they were also excited during the intermission activities, where one instance, I mean, it was the mascot, and he actually, in between the second and third period, the mascot actually perched himself right next to the guy driving the Zamboni and was firing off the t-shirt cannon 2 inches away from the man, trying to just quietly do his job in between periods and making sure the ice is intact. So that was kind of enjoyable. As far as the game action itself, there was a goal not even 3 minutes into the contest, and that came when a forward circled back around. He was probably a few feet in front of the blue line and made a pass across the ice through a little crease in the defense, it was even much more enjoyable when you see it on the YouTube clip, how precise the pass was. And he passed it to a defenseman who had snuck behind the Reading defense and tapped it in for a goal. That really showed off the amazing passing that hockey can produce from time to time. Shortly thereafter, there was another goal, and this really brought up the crowd. It was a turnover in the neutral zone, and there was only one defender in front of the forward who got the puck for the Adirondack Thunder, and he quickly wrist shotted it, and it went in. The second period did not provide any goals, but it did provide some entertainment in the form of a fight. There was, and I honestly, believe it or not, going into the game, I forgot fighting was involved in hockey. It had been so long since I'd been to a hockey game. And you could kind of sense it occurring. It wasn't a big surprise when it actually happened, even though it happened very fast. The initiation of the fight itself, there wasn't a lot of build up to it. But one of the players from the Adirondack Thunder got hit from behind. And you could see afterwards that the players were kind of talking back. All the players were they were getting hostile. They were trash talking back and forth. And eventually the player who struck the Adirondack forward from behind was around center ice. And there was a Thunder team member that was skating next to him. And they were just getting a little bit closer and closer. You could see their hands were basically down already. And you could sense it's like, okay, they're isolated. They're skating away from the action. And then poof, they dropped the gloves and they started fighting rather briefly for only a couple minutes, but it was still kind of interesting reminder seeing how I completely forgot that fighting was a part of the sport. And what I found most interesting about that was after the fight ended, the hostility was gone. So, I mean, the way, like baseball, they say they manage the game themselves more than the umpires. Hockey, more or less, they do the same thing. Street justice, you could say. And the hostility that was there for the couple minutes that led up to the fight, gone completely. They went on to playing the game. They went through the line, shook hands and whatnot, but there was no hostility afterwards. They just played the game and weren't worried about checking each other hard. And it would clearly, the hostility was just dissipated by the fight itself. And as well as after the fight, the player who got struck from the Thunder skated over. I'm not positive. I know I believe you'll be able to clarify on the video itself that I link up from the game recap. But he skated over to the penalty box as the player who got in the fight was collecting his things, and he basically showed his appreciation, gave him a little fist bump, and said thanks. And I know what you were doing. I know what your intentions were, even though you kind of penalized our team here and you're going to be out of the game for 5 minutes. I appreciate you sticking up for me. It means a lot. So that was kind of a cool reminder. The third period, you saw goals from each team. They were more or less kind of sloppy goals where there's a lot of action going on in front of the net. It was just very clouded and very, it wasn't very clear. And basically the puck ended up being deflected in. It was just a lot of trash, I think people would describe it as. A lot of trash in front of the net, and then the puck managed to sneak its way past the goaltender. So that was how the game closed, and the Thunder won 3-1. But I would say my biggest takeaway from my observational experience of going to the game was that people really fixate on the puck, and this could be transferred over to other sports. I know people do it all the time in basketball where they just get fixated on the ball itself and forget about all the action away from it. Same thing with football. You get stuck watching the quarterback, and you watch even the camera will pan towards wherever the ball is. But a lot of times where the scoring occurs is away from wherever the ball is. So in basketball, for instance, the screening, the cutting, all that stuff plays a huge role in determining how the basket is ultimately scored or missed and how those opportunities develop. And the same thing goes for hockey. The positioning of the offense and in relation to the defense, as well as the goaltender, plays a huge role in determining where the puck goes next and if it has a chance to go in. Those are where the opportunities are gained, is the positioning and whatnot of the offensive players and the defensive players in goal scoring opportunities. So naturally, the crowd is kind of like stunned when you see those, like as I described it before, trash goals or even the first goal where it was passed across the ice, you couldn't really see that opportunity right away if you were paying attention to the puck. You just saw the guy, oh, he looks like almost like he's retreating back to his side of defense, and boom, he had a crease and passed it, and it was a great opportunity. It was actually very clear that the opportunity placed itself. But since everybody was fixated on the puck, they didn't really see it, and they were kind of stunned and surprised that it occurred. Whereas the most excitement and engagement for the in-game action, and that brought the most ooze, was when there was that turnover in the neutral zone, and it was isolated. There was nobody else around. It was just the defender, a goalie, and a guy with a puck. And that's why I think people get really excited for shootouts and breakaways in hockey, because it's very simple and it's easy to understand, and everybody knows that there's a scoring opportunity available. Whereas with the pass or those two late goals where they were kind of deflected in, you don't really see, it's not clear to the naked eye and to the novice that scoring opportunities are available. Now, the person I got to interview was actually Cal McLean, which is the head coach of the Adirondack Thunder. He made some time available for me during his office hours, and I just wanted to kind of get a background into more or less what it's like day in and day out for a minor league hockey team. And he said some of the I'll go over the notes of what I take away from the conversation. We did touch on some psychology aspects of dealing with minor league hockey and professional hockey in general. The number of NHL contracted players on a typical East Coast Hockey League roster is between 3 and 6. As he said, sometimes they're on injured reserve, sometimes they move up to the AHL, but active, it's always a maximum of 4, as was mentioned within the rules. The majority of the Adirondack Thunder team is actually made up of rookies or younger players who are in their only second year of competition, which relates in the roster. When you look it up, the average age is actually 25 years old. And he said some teams have a different approach when it comes to their ECHL roster construction, and they kind of more or less depend on more experienced and veteran players, more nuanced players, but those players are not under contract with the AHL or the NHL affiliates, and they more or less gather them from those supplemental leagues that I was discussing earlier. And one of those leagues is the Southern Hockey League, which is where he first was a head coach, I believe in Virginia, he stated. Virginia or Carolina, one of the two. I don't quote me on that. I'm sure you can look it up somewhere. And that's somewhere where he kind of developed his coaching roots. And those rosters are made up of players, obviously, who can't stick in the ECHL or AHL and gain contracts there. So they go down there and they gain more experience and playing time. And just they obviously are very passionate about the game. Salaries are much less, clearly. And these players can be signed both during the off season to contracts, or during the season they can be called upon for short-term contracts to fill in roster gaps when players are moved up within the affiliates. The Thunder are unique in the ECHL as they are one of 2 teams, along with Manchester, to be actually owned and operated by an NHL organization directly. Other ECHL teams' rosters can be constructed of affiliates from many different organizations, and he kind of sees the Adirondack Thunder and the Manchester Monarchs method along being something that'll be just be growing in the future, because what this allows the NHL organization to do is have more direct influence and knowledge of what's going on with their contracted players and the teams they're affiliated with. They're in constant communication with us, and this is directly related to the front office and the coaching staff. Every single day, both Cal and other members of management and the coaching staff contact both the AHL affiliate in Stockton as well as the Calgary Flames, and they discuss multiple things. They discuss roster construction, who's moving up, who's moving down, potential free agents, trade scenarios that occur, trade scenarios that could potentially occur. They obviously discuss player development, both their on-ice skills, practice habits, and their off-ice characteristics and personalities, and how they're doing generally, if that's pertinent. Their on-ice performance is sometimes discussed as well, which is what's going well in games, areas of improvement they're looking to do on, overall strategy and execution. And the main focus, he said, for his team and what he likes to focus in on and his area of expertise is really developing practice habits and staying active on both ends of the ice, away from the action, such as positioning, and always staying engaged in the action. And the biggest focus, he said, basically across the board for the ECHL is on player development. And makes sense, it's the AA affiliate, so they're 2 steps essentially away from the top level of competition in the NHL. They have a great deal of discretion. The ECHL teams, the Adirondack Thunder, obviously, is what he's speaking upon. When it comes to style of play, in-game tactics, practice approach, as well as lineups and playing time. The main influence from the top of the organization is on honing players' on-ice fundamentals, such as good practice, understanding good practice habits, how to watch film of themselves and opponents, as well as their on-ice awareness. The big key, as he said, it's player development, so it's going to be fundamentals, both on and off the ice. If they're able to establish good fundamentals and a good foundation of basic tenets that are seen throughout the organization, then it makes it that much easier to become more nuanced and more detail-oriented as they move throughout the organization and gain experience. And off the ice is another aspect that they really focus in on for his particular team, and that comes down to nutrition, sleeping habits, and weight room and stuff of that nature, as well as interpersonal skills and developing them as human beings, he said, is something they really emphasize from Calgary on down to Adirondack. And it's obviously reflected on when it comes to drafting players as well as signing free agents. He said that as far as himself, Stockton, and Calgary, they always put character as the top priority and ahead of on-ice talent and capability. They look for players who have a passion for the game, are intrinsically motivated, people who are constantly looking to improve about the game, asking questions. They want to be coached. They have a hard work ethic. They enjoy being at practice, improving their bodies both in the weight room and through diet and nutrition. They understand, and he said the biggest key for players in professional hockey is being able to handle and maintain emotional stability in the dynamic environment that professional sports is. Roster turnover is obviously super high, both in season and off season. Rosters can be turned and flipped upside down constantly, which leads to the lineups constantly being in flux, and playing time is inconsistent. They can't guarantee it for players because people are coming in and out, different capabilities of players, different goals. There's going to be levels of fatigue. Things are always changing, and be able to maintain that intrinsic motivation and that passion for the game and that constantly changing environment. He said those are the people who have the most success in professional hockey. We went on to discuss the differences between the American Hockey League and the East Coast Hockey League because I wanted to see if there was any major differences between the 2 minor leagues before they move up to the NHL, which obviously shows the biggest difference in the skill set. And even probably the novice fans can understand the difference between going to an NHL game and going to an ECHL game. He said that the first 2 lines for the East Coast Hockey League in comparison to the AHL Hockey League, the American Hockey League, most people can't even tell the difference. He says sometimes fellow coaches, there really is no difference between the AHL and ECHL coaching in terms of preparation for opponents and for the first 2 lines. And it's reflected in how often those players move up and down between the 2 affiliates. And basically, much of the roster selection for the organization comes down to what the contracted players' needs are. So take, for instance, the Adirondack Thunder and what Cale McLean's expertise is. He's really, players are sent to him to improve their defensive capabilities. He's very defensive minded. And like I said, he's great at instilling practice habits and on-ice awareness. So players in need of that tend to spend a little time with the Adirondack Thunder so they can hone in those skills. Whereas out in Stockton, the AHL affiliate, they get more into, their coaching staff is more detail-oriented and understanding the nuances of the game, and they're very into film study and understanding how to improve themselves and understanding opponent tactics via film. And naturally, when it comes to AHL players, the more experienced players, so they have better on-ice awareness, he said. They're more attuned to the subtleties of the game, and they're more strategic in their approach both on and off the ice when it comes to their profession. And they are encouraged, obviously, when they're down in the ECHL to share their knowledge, and none of them really have any qualms with sharing that information with the younger players that make up the ECHL roster. Once he brought that up, I was kind of interested in like the team bonding aspects. He said nothing is really forced. There are obviously certain community aspects with sponsorships and whatnot within the area that they are organized and they are required to attend for their team. But other than that, nothing is really required. It's encouraged to interact with each other off the ice, whether it be visiting museums or just ingratiating themselves in the community, having dinner with each other, sightseeing, stuff of that nature. Especially on the road, he said, because you're obviously sometimes your family typically typically isn't able to travel with you throughout the season. So if you want that social aspect of your life to stay engaged, you include your teammates in it and just go out and do things together, because there are certainly some downtime when you're on the road, as much as these guys are over the 72 game schedule. He said the main emphasis on interpersonal skills and relating to each other happens within the confines of the arena once they step into that professional atmosphere. And this occurs both in practice when they're going through drills. They'll switch up teams and have different players interacting with each other and working together for a common goal. It occurs in the weight room, where they switch up partners on a monthly basis. That way they get to know each other and become a little bit more aware of who is on their team and what makes them tick, and whether they could form potential friendship and whatnot. That way, he said, it certainly influences their on-ice relationship as well. And they're clearly encouraged to talk during warm-ups, in the locker room, and during cool-downs as well. When it comes to his relationship with the players, he said communication is the biggest thing. Because as we talked about before, it's a dynamic environment, professional sports. So he's checking in with players when they're not acting in accordance with their typical behavior. And he said he does this first in kind of a laissez-faire, a relaxed environment type of way, whether it be, and basically other people are around initially, and based off the response he gets and the cues and the vibe he receives from that, he'll take it from there and decide whether he needs to do something more in private, or he just uses his best discretion to judge whether or not how he will further take a stance with the players and checking in. Sorry, I got a little thirsty there. And he said, but the biggest thing is just taking down the unknown, because things are always changing. So he wants to communicate with the players when rosters are changing, when their role is changing, when playing time is going to be changing. He wants them to know as soon as possible. That way there is that way the unknown is minimized as much as possible in the changing environment that they work in. Overall, in closing, I would say that I found the minor league hockey experience that I was able to gather very rewarding. It was refreshing to see how passionate all these people were about both hockey and developing the players as athletes and as human beings off the ice as well. And I think that was very inspiring to me, because I have a desire to work in player development for the sport of basketball in the future, and I know how important it is to develop them as human beings first and establish that relationship in order to develop them on the court, or on the ice in this case for minor league hockey. And the other big takeaway I took away was that I really agreed with the organizational and coaching staff's approach to allowing their players to maintain a healthy emotional state throughout their time with the organization by communicating. And by giving away that information that is pertinent to them, the athlete, along with checking in on their status, can go a long way in minimizing that uncertainty that is unavoidable in the profession that they've ingratiated themselves in. I hope you enjoyed this, and I look forward to hearing what you guys have for questions, and thanks for your time, guys. Appreciate it.